All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to open up the regular meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education this Monday, October 20th, 2025. If we can all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to review and approve the agenda of October 20th. Can I please get a motion to approve? Erica, second Penny. All in favor? We're all here. I love it. Thank you. And then approval of the minutes of October 6th. Can I please get a motion to approve the minutes? Penny, second Matt Campbell. All in favor? Great. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to move on to Student Spotlight, which we haven't had in a little while, so I'm excited to have you guys back.
Yes, and I am thrilled to welcome Sarah Gleason and the NCHS Madrigal Ensemble to our board meeting this evening. As you know, we started our Student Spotlight last year, and the Madrigal sang for us then, and it was such a highlight. We wanted them to sing. I invited them to come back and sing again. And we wanted to also share that, Penny, over your 18 years on the board, you have rarely missed a New Canaan High School graduation. And at each of those graduations, you've heard the Madrigals sing the Irish Blessing to the graduates. And tonight, they're here to sing it for you.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. What a treat. Thank you. So this evening, we mark an end of an era of an extraordinary legacy of service. Penny Ration, after 18 remarkable years, the New Canaan Board of Education is stepping down. Penny, on behalf of the entire board and the community you've served so tirelessly, I want to express our deepest gratitude. From your first term, Penny, you brought a passion for education that's shaped our schools in profound ways. Proud Dartmouth and UVA alum and dedicated mother and wife, you've been a steadfast advocate for our students, championing initiatives that foster empathy, deepen understanding, and ensure that every child can thrive. Whether serving on school building committees, contributing to policy discussions, or navigating challenging times with grace and an open mind, you've reminded us that education is among the most important work on the planet. Your wisdom, commitment, and unwavering focus on what's best for New Canaan's families have made our board stronger and our schools better. We've been so fortunate to have you as a colleague and a friend. Your insights have guided us through budgets, curricula, countless decisions that impact generations, and best of all, you've always done it with that warm, beaming, contagious smile. And Penny, as you embark on this next chapter, know that your impact will endure. We wish you joy, relaxation, and new adventures ahead. Thank you once again for your tremendous service. And I'd like to open up to some others that I'm sure have some wonderful things to say as well. Brendan?
Well said. So from the moment I joined the board, it was clear to me that you were the person to go to if I had absolutely any question. You've always been just an incredibly fierce advocate for the kids of New Canaan, the entire community. And to me, the most amazing quality is that when you're fiercely advocating, it always comes from the best place. And regardless of who it is, whether it's, someone in town government or somebody on the board, after that argument, you're always the first person to come over and, give somebody a hug or shake their hand. It's always with a big smile. And as a result, everybody in town absolutely loves you, and we're all going to miss you a ton. It's been, just personally, it's been an amazing 10 years for me working with you. And, every moment has been, it's just been special. So I appreciate all of our work together. And I just salute your 18 years. I have a feeling that your work isn't going to continue and you'll find other things to do. But you've really shaped, I think generations of New Canaan students because of all that you've done on the board. So thank you. Miss you.
I will say that I think that the biggest surprise in serving on the BOE, and it's been many learning curves, has been how much I enjoy working with you, Penny. And I think that's probably your biggest surprise is you tolerate me as well as you do. And so
Sort of mad you got your picture in a presentation.
last year, right? And
Well, I
there's
did.
no, yeah, exactly. I was mad about it too, so it makes sense. But I want to echo what Brendan said, and I think that despite some differences, right? I really appreciate your kindness, I appreciate your patience, and I appreciate your experience, and that you offer so freely to all of us, regardless of political affiliation. And so, you've really put New Canaan schools and students above everything else, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your service. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Penny, yeah.
So I just had just a couple of thank yous, which I'll try and get through here. Basically, thank you all. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Matt, for those amazing comments. And for the song, which gets me at graduation, so it totally got me. But it's very special because my daughter-in-law is Irish, so she's going to love that. But first of all, I wanted to say, I just have some thank yous. I wanted to say thank you to the unbelievably talented administration and teachers for all you do every year for our students. And I know that 18 years, because I've been to your celebrations of retirement, I'm just a beginner. But thank you, because you show up with dedication and intelligence and perseverance, and you make our schools tremendous with everything you do. I wanted to say thank you to the town bodies and the communities, because every year you make the decision to invest in the New Canaan schools. And every year, we all know now that we have these amazing challenges. We didn't know where they came from, but all of a sudden we're there, and we need to pivot and take care of it, and the town supports us. So that has been a great blessing. And I think we've all seen that when all these groups, the teachers, the communities, the Board of Ed individual members, the town bodies work together, we make unbelievable great schools. And that includes great connections with the students, great academics, great clubs. Who doesn't like the Model UN presentations? So anyhow, it's just been an honor and a privilege to serve with you for the last 18 years on this Board of Ed. And I wish you all the luck, because we've seen you're starting from a great place, but you've got unbelievable challenges ahead. So I wish you great luck in meeting those. Thanks.
Thank you, Penny.
Don't go too far, Penny. We're calling you to some of those meetings. I mean that, seriously. All right, moving on. Comments from the public. To ensure the public's right to be heard, board set aside time during the meeting for public comments, 2 minutes to be allotted to each speaker, and a maximum of 15 to each subject. Would anybody like to approach the board? No? Great. All right, moving on to reports and recognition with Dr. Carenti. Ooh, it's bright.
Okay, that's a really tough act to follow. I think I'm just going to drop the mic and walk away. But thank you, everyone, for having us here tonight to present our results on our 3 through 8 Smarter Balance, Next Generation Science Standards. 2 weeks ago, you had the opportunity to meet the high school leaders who are part of the district leadership team, and tonight it gives me great pleasure to introduce the rest of the team who's here with us this evening. We've got Kathy Grimes, if you can just give a little wave, who's our reading coordinator for K4, Karen Scalzo, who's our writing coordinator for grade 5, K5, Sarah Bross, who's our ELA coordinator for grades 5 through 8, Jen DePonte, our math coordinator for grades K through 8, Melinda Meyer, our innovation director in science, K8, and unfortunately Mary Hannah's under the weather tonight, so she couldn't be here. And we're also really privileged to have some of our administrators here this evening, Zoe Robinson and Matt Kasich and David Gussage. Thank you so much. So certainly these people are the content experts who stay current on best practices and design wonderful learning opportunities. Sorry about that. For our students, they lead curriculum writing, assessment design, professional learning, data teams, and assist with the coaching instructionally. The ultimate purpose of assessment is to support and enhance student learning. It's multifaceted, and it should be used to drive our instruction. Assessments should be both standardized and non-standardized, and tonight I will be presenting an overview of the standardized assessments, specifically the results of the Next Generation Science Assessment and the Smarter Balance. By federal and state law, we are required to universally assess students yearly in English language arts and math in grades 3 through 8, and once in high school. We must also assess students in science in grades 5, 8, and once in high school. State testing is part of an accountability system, and it provides an annual snapshot of student achievement. State testing should not be the sole measure of student achievement. If curriculum is aligned to Common Core standards and students are receiving high-quality instruction, for the most part, they should do well. And we use a wide variety of assessments within our district here to assure that all students are growing, learning, and moving forward. The 3 tests we administer in the spring, as I've already said, Smarter Balance and Next Generation Science Assessment, and then 2 weeks ago you heard about the Connecticut SAT. Those are the 3 tests that are recognized in the state of Connecticut. We also have alternative assessments for students who are significantly disabled. And we have the CTA, which is the Connecticut Alternate Assessments for Math and ELA. And then we also have an alternate assessment for science, and that's the Connecticut Alternate Assessment in Science. This is our assessment calendar as we move into the 25-26 school year. The state gives us a large window in which to complete assessments. We usually start after April break, and the testing is about 5 sessions, 2 sessions for ELA, 2 sessions for math, and 1 for science if it's a testing year. Students in grades 3 through 5 sit for about an hour per session, while students in grades 6 through 8 can sit a bit longer. So I'm going to begin by talking about the Next Generation Science Assessment. The Next Generation Science Assessment is computer adaptive, and it uses the same online system as the Smarter Balance. The questions engage students in the 3 dimensions of science: the science and engineering practices, the cross-cutting concepts, and the disciplines of life science, physical science, earth and space science. And we use those practices and concepts to assess those 3 disciplines. The tests are a wide range of standalone items, multi-choice, tables. They're always looking at phenomenons. So it's a wide variety of various test questions that they're given on the assessment. So here's our results. We're very proud of our students. In fifth grade, 84.9% of our students met or exceeded goal in fifth grade, and 85.6% of those students exceeded the goal in eighth grade. What does that mean in the DIRG? We compare our overall scores to the DIRG, and we like to look at like communities when we're looking at those results. And we're very proud of our fifth graders who were first in the DIRG, second in the state to a very small town called East Granby. And then our eighth graders were second in the DIRG and third in the state, following once again a small district, regional school district, and Weston. So as we look at our data by performance level, the top bar is our fifth grade and the bottom bar is our eighth grade. We look at the results and we see that the blue is what we call level 4. Those are students who have exceeded the benchmark. Green is level 3, and those are the students who are at the benchmark. And yellow are the students who are approaching, that's a level 2, and red means that those are the students that have not met the goal. So we look at all the students overall, but we do hone in on those students who are level 1 and level 2, and we really confirm that there's a plan in place to help those students. Those kinds of plans might be students who have IEPs, students who have 504s, students who have RTI plans in reading and or math. And so we really make sure that all of those students who are at those level 1s and 2 are really getting all that they need. And you can imagine that some of the difficulties that students who are having plans in RTI for reading might also experience in science. So high levels of academic vocabulary, high levels of reading on informational texts. So we really work closely, and we'll talk a little bit about some of that ongoing work in a minute. Oops. What's also interesting was there was some questions raised last year about our eighth graders, and there was questions raised about how can we track our fifth grade to eighth grade. So unlike the Smarter Balanced has a growth measure because the kids are tested from year to year, and the claims and the targets that they're tested on build on one another. What happens in science is the students are tested on science material that they learn in those grades, mainly 3 through 5, but obviously K through 5. And then the test changes from 6 to 8. So something that may have been tested in 5th grade is not necessarily tested in 8th grade. It's a new test. But we still dove in very deeply to look at where those 5th graders were and where they were as 8th graders. We were really proud because we saw a lot of our 5th graders that grew from level 1 to level 2. We saw some of our 5th graders that grew from level 2 to 3. What's very, very interesting as Ms. Meyer and I dug into this data deeply was we found that there were 9% of our students that were not here as 5th graders. So that means 23 new students moved in at some point when they were in SACs. They moved in when they were in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. So that means that they didn't have the same kinds of science experiences as the 5th graders that may have been here K through 5, but certainly as those 5th graders that moved from 5th to 8th grade. So it's just an interesting data point as we look at it. We also take a look at the gender. And we look at the gender by not only by all the kids in the grade level, but then we narrow down into how did the students do within each of those individual classes. And once again, we're always looking at those students who may not be meeting that goal to make sure that we've got those plans in place for them. We begin to talk about the ongoing work in science, and as I just said, when we're talking about students who are at level 1 or level 2, many of those students are receiving some type of support. They might be receiving special education services, they might have a 504 plan, or they might be receiving response to intervention. So we really dove in last year very deeply. We've always worked hard with our special education teachers, but we really spent a lot of time educating our special education teachers about academic vocabulary that students receive in science so that they could help to support those students. And we also talked a little bit about just how the science test is made up. It's something that we're going to continue to do, making sure that our special education teachers are at the tables when we have data teams. They have such good insight about the students that they work with in small groups or individually. And then it's also a great opportunity for them to learn about the general education curriculum. So it works both ways for our special education teachers and general education teachers. And you will hear that as a theme as we go through math and through reading. And we've noticed a lot of success with this at the elementary levels, as you'll see some of that data in our 3rd and 4th graders in reading and math. Really working closely with the special education teachers, having them work closely with math specialists so they have a deep understanding of how curriculum is taught, so that then they can scaffold and work with those students that they're meeting with regularly. And that also holds true for kids that are in RTI. Another thing that we're really proud of this year is in August, all of our K through 12 staff, as well as our administrators, participated in professional learning as we really dove deeply into the 3 levels of engagement. And we spent time really talking about the behavioral engagement, the relational engagement, and the cognitive engagement, that we really, we broadly as educators use that term engagement, that students are engaged. Well, what does that really mean? And students need to be engaged in those 3 areas. We spent a lot of time diving into cognitive engagement and what it looks like and what it sounds like in classrooms. We look at 3 questions that kind of help to guide some of the work when you walk into those classrooms. What's the level of thinking that's happening in a classroom? Who is doing that thinking? And then how many are thinking and for how long? And so what we've done this year is we've started some walkthroughs with our teacher leaders, our coaches and our administrators going into classrooms, looking at how instruction's being delivered, looking at our cognitive engagement, behavioral relational engagement, and diving into some really great conversations afterwards. And so we're looking to continue that work in all of the content areas as we move forward. And I promise I won't go into those 2 points again as we move into reading and math, but I just wanted to kind of give you the good details about those. One of the things that we've also found some success in, and we'd like to continue to explore further in the area of science, is we've created this interdisciplinary unit in 2nd grade on plant-animal relationships, and it really integrates social studies, science, and reading. And so you find the kids are just so actively engaged because as they're reading about the science, they're studying it in science or they're studying it in social studies. We've seen a lot of success with our classrooms and our teachers, and we're going to continue to explore some of those different interdisciplinary units as we move forward. And then it's always building that cross-disciplinary common language to support students' understanding. What does one word mean in social studies that might mean something different in English? And so it's really helping to build that vocabulary for our students. I'm now going to move into the Smarter Balanced assessment. I do have some people here that have done great analysis of the data and can certainly elaborate on any of the ongoing work as we move forward, but I'm just going to try to go through everything together and then I'll take questions at the end if that's okay. So the Smarter Balance is also a computer adaptive test, and it contains a variety of items, multiple choice and open-ended responses. In math, there's also a performance task. And the performance task is designed to provide students with an opportunity to demonstrate their ability to apply their knowledge and higher order thinking skills to explore and analyze a complex real-world scenario. In English language arts, there's 4 areas of knowledge and skills that are measured. In reading, students show they can read and understand a variety of complex grade-appropriate informational and literary texts. In writing, students must use evidence to support their ideas in written responses, and they must produce effective writing for a range of purposes. In listening, the students interpret and use information delivered orally to determine main ideas, summarize or analyze, and then research is researching a topic and using the findings to take a position. There are also 4 areas in math in knowledge and skills that our students are expected to be able to do. In concepts and procedures, students will explain and use mathematics to solve problems, and they must complete problems accurately. In problem solving, students need to understand how math concepts link together. And then in modeling and data analysis, students must apply their mathematical knowledge to solve real-world problems. And then students are always asked to communicate their mathematical reasoning in writing. The scoring is similar to science. Level 1 is when students are not meeting the standard. 2 is they're approaching the standard. 3 is they've meet the achievement standard. And 4 is exceeding the achievement standard. And then in reading and in math, we have vertical scores, and that's what we use to measure this growth over time. All parents who have students who are assessed in grades 3 through 8 and also in science receive a report. They receive feedback on how their student or child is performing in each of the areas in English, language arts, and math. The feedback is somewhat limiting when you're looking at that individual report, and we certainly get a much better picture when we look at it by school, grade level, and teacher. And we really have an opportunity to dive more deeply into claims and targets. Parents aren't given those reports on the targets and claims. They don't give us individual breakdowns. So we're really looking at it and looking at it as a whole grade level. And we'll dive into that by school and then also by teacher. So I'm going to start with the results in ELA. We're very excited to go through all of our results tonight. When analyzing our data, we start with our big picture. And so we have 87.6% of our 3rd through 8th graders that met or exceeded the achievement level of a level 3 or 4. We take a look at our grade level data, and here's a historical overview of this grade level data. And we look at it, although they may not be completely matched cohorts, they certainly give us a snapshot of how our students are performing. We're certainly very proud of all of our grade levels, but you certainly take a look at that 4th grade at 93.6% of our 4th graders that met or exceeded that goal. And it's amazing to think of them as 3rd graders where they were 87.5, and you just wonder how much higher can they go, and then to perform at 93.6 is quite impressive. We're also really proud of that current 6th grade. When you look at that 6th grade cohort as well, they were strong 5th graders at 89.7, and then they continued to grow slightly, but once again, 90.9% of them. And then certainly taking a look at that 6th to 7th grade, I thought was really interesting as well. That was a grade level that we really honed in on last year. So when they were in 6th grade, it was 81.9, and then to see that growth up to 85.8%. We also take a look at our achievement by level, and it's really impressive to say we have 71.9% of our 3rd graders who are exceeding the benchmark, exceeding that level that we're required of in our students, and then 79.4% of our 4th graders, and that's really amazing. When they were 3rd graders, it was 65.7% of those kids who exceeded the benchmark, and now we're up to 79.4%. So certainly that's 14% growth. That's pretty statistically significant. And then once again, we don't just look at that high end, we also take a look at where we are with those level 1 and 2s, and we certainly make sure that we have plans in place for all of those students as well. We also do a comparison with gender. We're looking strong with our 4th and 6th graders, but there are just a few data points I wanted to point out. Last year, we spent a lot of time talking about the 6th grade boys, where only 77% of them had met the goal. And now as we look at them as 8th graders, we have 83% of them. So we did really dive deeply into that instruction in 7th grade, and we're really proud of the growth that they've made. We're going to continue to, analyze the male data in 8th grade, but once again, all those kids have been accounted for. And now we take a look at our data in comparison to our DIRG. And we are at the top of the DIRG and top of the state overall, with 87.6% of our students meeting and exceeding the achievement level. We also dive into the grade level data, and we take a look at where we are. And certainly, we are performing significantly ahead of other communities, especially as we look at those third graders, fourth and sixth graders. We're going to continue to closely monitor the fifth grade cohort. Although they were high in the DIRG, we still want to make sure that we have all the necessary resources for them as sixth graders and making sure that we help them to move forward as sixth graders. And we do know that we have a high percentage of students in that grade level with some different needs. And so we're closely working with that grade level. So as I mentioned, here's some of the ongoing work that we're working on in ELA. I already spoke about the engagement work that we're doing in all the content areas, and I've spoke really highly about the special education work that's been going on. We've seen great gains as we watched that happen in our third and fourth grade, and we're looking to replicate that as we move into SACS, and certainly working with some of our new special education teachers over at SACS as well. We're continuing to analyze our student work, providing feedback to our students, and increasing that small group instruction when they need it. What is it that sometimes students need to be taught again? And that's really how small group instruction helps. We continue to monitor that vertical progression of our priority standards, and then we certainly are developing the vocabulary, that inferential thinking, and really looking at that critical thinking and comparing and contrasting between texts. I know that there was a question that came up at the SATs in regards to conventions. We're not seeing an area of concern with the conventions on our Smarter Balanced results. However, 2 years ago, we really did identify the grammar as a gap area, and we actually integrated a lot of lessons. You'll see them starting as early as kindergarten now, and they move right on up in through 8th grade. And then I know there were some questions last year about spelling and holding students accountable, and so we do have a editing checklist that we work really closely with our teachers on and really enforcing with our students when they're finished with their writing. So they're always getting those ideas on paper, getting those thoughts on paper first, and then they have an editing checklist that they go back to where they're looking for capitalization. They're looking for lowercase. Oftentimes kids always capitalize and we say, well, and doesn't need to be capitalized, it should be lowercase. They go back and they analyze those spelling mistakes and holding them accountable for what they have learned during the foundations for the decoding and holding them accountable for the encoding. They're looking at the punctuation. They're looking at words that they may have missed in sentences, so they start to identify, oh, I left that word out when I was writing so fast, or they added extra words in, or really understanding how to create those new paragraphs. So now we'll take a look at our math data. As we look at our math data, we follow a similar process to what we've done for the other content areas. We started that big picture where 87.8% of our 3rd through 8th graders met or exceeded the achievement level, which really puts us right back at those pre-pandemic numbers. We tend to take a look at our grade level results. Once again, we're really impressed with those 4th graders. They were 90.5% at or above goal as 3rd graders, and to grow to 93.6 is pretty amazing to see all of the work that and that really speaks to how do you extend students. So we're going to continue to probably work through those challenges when you have that kind of a cohort. How do you continue to extend that curriculum and make sure that we're meeting all their needs? 6th grade made huge growth as well, 80.9, and now they're up to 87.5%. And then look at 8th grade as well. Last year, 79.8%, up to 88%. So lots of growth. Once again, we know it's not a completely matched cohort, but it certainly gives us a good snapshot of how the students are doing from year to year. We also take a look at our data by level. And we're really pleased to see that high percentage of students exceeding that achievement level. And we can really look at math and say that more than 50% of our students at every grade level are really exceeding that achievement level, which is just very nice to see. Once again, always looking to make sure that we've got good plans in place for those kids who have not met those benchmarks yet. We continue to look at our gender comparisons as well. We're certainly watching the 5th grade group of girls. We went back to look at all the kids who didn't meet that benchmark, and where they definitely have plans in place through RTI, many of them. What's really impressive too is, once again, we look at that group of 7th graders. When they were in 6th grade as the males, only 78.1% of them had met that goal as 6th graders, and now they're at 86.6% as 7th graders. And then the same held true for those 8th graders, 79.6% of the males in 7th grade, and now they're up to 87.3%. So really diving deeply into that instruction to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all those kids. We'd like to take a look at our comparison across our DIRG to look at those like communities. We're very proud, New Canaan is at the top of the DIRG and top of the state, with 87.8% of their students meeting or exceeding the achievement level. And then we take a look at how they performed grade level wise, and really impressive. They were top of the DIRG in all of the grade levels except for 7th. And once again, I just spoke about that 7th grade cohort because they made huge gains from 6th to 7th grade. So we're very proud of that. So we talk a little bit about the ongoing work. I've already talked about the engagement. I've already talked about the special education. We continue to improve those opportunities for problem solving, critical reasoning, and communication within our classrooms, and really working hard on those, building those thinking classrooms, mathematics. And then once again, similar to ELA, it's making sure that we look at the vertical progression of all of those standards, and specifically how they relate to whole numbers, to fractions, to rational numbers, because you really do see those targets and claims adjust from year to year. We also continue to say, how do we look at all of this through interdisciplinary? These are the practices for math, science, and English language arts. And you can see really in the center of that Venn diagram how they all come together. There are not social studies practices, but if Mary Hannah was here, she would really talk about the level of inquiry and the inquiry arc that we use in social studies and how that all integrates into the practices here. So I do want to just talk a little bit about the vertical scores and how we take a look at our students. So after we examine the big picture and the percentage of students who have met or exceeded the goal, we really begin to dive into those vertical scaled scores. And each level is divided in half. The vertical scaled score places students in a category. So for example, a student could be a high level 5 or high level 6 if they're sitting in level 3. So if you look across the top, it tells you level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and then they take each of those levels and they divide them in half. And that allows us to really take a look at how well our students are growing over time. And it helps us to really make sure that even if they're at that level 8, that they're also either maintaining or growing at that level 8 as well. And here is the vertical scaled scores for English language arts. So you have them for math, and then you also have them for English language arts. And then just here's an example to walk you through it. So certainly as part of the Next Generation Accountability Report, the state is looking for all students to grow regardless of their level. So here's an example of how that growth is measured. So you take student A, who had a scaled score of 2,552 as a 7th grader, and that put them at a level 3, or on the growth chart at a low level 5. As an 8th grader, they had a scaled score of 2,580. So they grew 28 points, but they were supposed to grow 40 points. So they don't get a growth flag because they didn't make that growth, but they still get a percentage. So 70% of their target was achieved. You look at student B, and student B got a a vertical scaled score of 2,601, which put them at a high level 6, a high 6, which is a level 3. And then as an 8th grader, they got that vertical scaled score of 2,686, would put them into a 7, which bumped them over into level 4, low 7. They grew 85 points. They were only supposed to grow 40, so they definitely met their growth flag. And then they got a percentage of that target is 110%. You can't go higher than 110%. You take a look at student C, and student C was at that high-end 8 with a 2,694. They went to 2,704 for their vertical scaled score. They grew 10 points, but they maintained, so that's why they got their growth flag, and they achieved 83% of their target. And then you have student D, who shows that they had a vertical scaled score of 2,617. They went down slightly to 2,610, which dropped them to that level 5. So once again, this is really important for us as we look at data, because this child would have been part of the level 3s. They would have been part of that percentage that met and exceeded the goal. But the questions we would raise is, that's great that they were still at that level 3, but a little bit concerning that they dropped on their vertical scaled score. So what may have happened for that student? And that's really, truly the level of the work that we're getting in, and taking a look at that. So unfortunately, they didn't meet their points for growth, they didn't get their growth flag, and they didn't meet their growth target. And so when we're looking at this, we're breaking this down for every teacher, starting in 4th grade, so they really could take a look at the students and whether those students have grown. And you can see that happening in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. We can also look at it as a scatter plot. This is just a 4th grade class. And look at that plot, you can really see that all but 2 students were at or above the goal. You've got 2 of the students right on that vertical scaled line, probably most likely level 3s, and probably were level 5s last year. And they grew, but probably not enough to put them into that, over that 100 mark. They're probably very similar to student A that we went through. And then you take a look at the student who's got the 2,580 as that vertical score, so they grew 50%, very similar to student D. So yes, once again, at or above on the achievement level, but didn't make the growth in that vertical scaled score. What's really remarkable is when you look at the student who's got that vertical scaled score of probably like 2,400 and something, but they're above that green line, which means they grew 110%. So that even though they didn't make their achievement of a 3 or 4, we celebrate 110% is huge growth for that student as well. And so that's really the individual level that we dive into for all of the students. And then we certainly take a look at how does this triangulate with our ongoing assessment. Because once again, Smarter Balance is just a snapshot. And you could have a child who had allergies that day and didn't perform as well as they should have. So certainly what we do on a day-to-day basis with our students, using our universal screeners that start all the way back in kindergarten, and then we have formative assessments, unit assessment, benchmark assessments, midterm assessments. We're always calling those in as we do our data teams to make sure that our students are moving forward. Here's a great snapshot of NWEA. We use NWEA starting really in 3rd grade. We give it in 2nd grade in the winter, but it's really in 3rd grade, and we give it every fall because you want to see year-to-year growth. And the NWEA is really interesting because you really can see a predictor of how students might even perform on the Smarter Balance. And it will tell you what level they would be at, and we're looking for that RIT growth over time. And we use all of this data to really monitor student growth over the course of a year. So certainly, we've presented a lot of information up tonight, but we really continue to look at our district systems that support all of our students in growth. We review our data by grade level, by class, by individual teachers. We look at individual students and how well they're performing. We review the data by targets in ELA, math, and science. We continue to progress monitor students through their benchmarks and their district assessments. We conduct data team meetings to assure that our students are moving forward. I've done presentations on RTI, so you know how RTI works. And then we have ongoing professional learning for our teachers. So that's it in a snapshot. And now
That's
I'll
great.
open it up for some questions. And if I need to bring up some people to help, happy to do so. And I know
Thank-
they're just so excited to come up.
Thank you so much. It's a lot, and thank you so much for you're never taking your foot off the gas, because it's impressive to say the least. I mean, the scores just keep getting better, but it's especially impressive to see the tremendous bounce back from 5 years ago after COVID, where we really didn't know what was happening and how quickly we can help our kids come back. So that's huge. And then just, we've always been, top of the DERG, but to see how much, having done this 4 years now, like I see the spreads are just widening and widening even greater every single year. So thank you for that. I have a couple questions. One, just, it's interesting to see that it does look at the entire, like all kids. I'm curious how many, on a relative basis, relative to other schools in our DERG, have the same amount of kids with IEPs, 504s, like kids that need special help, like relative to other towns. I know we do a great job of keeping our kids in district, but I mean, I'm curious how, like, because they're part of all of these assessments, like, do we have any idea how, like, relative to other towns, like what percentage of our kids versus like Westport or Darien?
So our identification rate is about 13%.
Right.
And schools in the area range from anywhere to 15 to 19%, 20%. So
Right.
our identification rate is lower.
Okay. All right. And then, hold on one sec here. So I'm curious, in the ELA, our results 2025 versus, I think, the math. The math results seem pretty consistent from 3rd to 8th grade, like right between like kind of 65 to 70%. And I'm just curious why it seems to, we start at 72, 80 in 3rd and 4th, and then it drops pretty quickly down to 56, all the way down to 47. So what is that attributable to?
And you're looking at the percentage of students
Correct.
exceeding the goal.
Exceeding, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I want everybody in the blue, Dr. Krenti. And
So once again, when you go into 6th grade, and Sarah, you can certainly speak to this if you'd like, but when you go into 6th grade, it's a new set of standards. And so the standards are going to get more challenging for the students. And so it is a new set of standards. We also know we're competing against a wide variety of social medias, and making sure that students are always reading and reading independently. It's also a big push of that informational text. So how do they read in science? How do they read in social studies? How do we push that informational text in reading as well? I think the cognitive engagement work that we're going to be doing with our teachers will help to raise some of the level of thinking that needs to be taking place in the classrooms as well. Reading's always challenging because it's that metacognition. I don't know necessarily what you're thinking about when you're reading, unless I ask you to do those written responses to those comprehension questions, or unless I'm meeting with you and having an engagement, a conversation with you about the book that you're reading. So it is really working at those critical levels and those higher levels where math, it's out there. You're seeing the work every single day. Where in reading, unless I'm asking them to do a written response to what they're doing in reading, it's sometimes hard to measure, are they making the progress that you would want them to make? Not sure if there's anything else, Sarah, that you would want to add. You have to come to a mic if you want to add something.
No pressure.
We'll even let you sit down if you'd like, or you can stand at the podium, wherever you'd like.
I would just add that in the same way that we compare the overall scores across the DERG, we can compare the different levels, and our students perform at a very high level, much higher than some of our peers. Our vertical scale score, which is that score that continues from 3rd grade all the way up to the end of 8th grade, is the highest in the state, which means that we have more kids at that level 4 and less kids at the level 1. So the reading becomes very analytical. The test is very complicated. They'll look at a passage over the course of, say, 4 or 5 questions, and they might have 9 responses, and they have to choose the best 3. So sometimes there are nuances between a couple of the responses, and so we do see some drops from that 4 to a 3 from the 7th to 8th grade level, but our students are performing at a very, very high level.
That's great, thank you. And then just, you give a lot here, and there's a lot more than just one thing that it's attributable to improving a kid's score from one year to the next, but there's some pretty significant examples of like where they're, the cohort in 6th grade was not performing, and then all of a sudden in 7th grade they're crushing it. Like, could you give some examples, some concrete examples about like what you saw that was either somewhat common or something that was really impactful? Or is that another board meeting with another packet?
I think the embedded coaching is really impactful for our teachers. It's ongoing professional learning. We certainly are working in data teams and really identifying students who need that extra help. Jill talked a little bit about the growth model, and I think that that's a real benefit of our data teams, that we're not just looking for kids to meet a goal, but we're looking for that continuous improvement and growth for all our learners. And then our coaches, and I would consider myself a coach as well, are able to go into the classrooms and help teachers work with small groups, teach teachers how to differentiate in the classroom. It's one thing to go to a conference or to go to a big meeting and hear about something you might do, but when you have a thought partner with you to be able to look closely at the students and look at their progress together, it really is the most impactful. We put a lot of resources into that 6th grade last year and helping our 6th grade teachers, because that standard shift from the 5th to 6th has been a drop for many years. And we saw a lot of improvement with that level of support for our teachers. The cohort that's currently in 6th grade, the 5th to 6th grade cohort, is a larger class, similar to our outgoing 8th grade class. And we do continue to put resources there as well to help with all 3 levels of engagement and making sure that our teachers and students are engaging kids at a variety of different levels.
That's great, yeah, thank you.
Jen, do you want
Thank
to
you.
respond about math and what you may have done in math? Because lots of growth in math as well.
I think similar to what Sarah said, the coaching model and the coaching support has been huge at SACS. We have 3 math specialists at SACS, and they're able to divide themselves among the grades and collaborate at the same time. So during department meetings, the teachers are engaging in the conversations with the specialists. There's a lot of back and forth, and the teachers are very aware of looking at their student work and next steps and things like that. We're helping the teachers to understand where students came from. I think at previous meetings we've talked about the vertical progression. That's been really helpful with math in terms of what might be lacking, where are their holes, where are their misunderstandings. So all of that professional learning that we do with the teachers helps to support kids in what they might be missing coming up and then stretching them going forward. So it's a constant movement in that sense. Dr. Carenti mentioned knowing what's happening at the levels 1 and 2, the students who are not making goal. And one thing we have done, really K-8, we're developing really solid, cohesive resources to help teachers with that instruction. Sometimes we have goals or plans for students. It could be something as simple as adding a multiple of 10 to a number to gain your computational fluency at the lower grades, to something as complicated as fraction operations in early middle school. So we're helping develop resources and professional learning for teachers so they have a good bank of what to do if it's student struggling, and that really completes the whole coaching cycle.
Great, thank you so much, really helpful. Matt?
Thank you. A couple questions. So First, when we look at the data on, I think this is for the next gen assessments for 2022. Nope, excuse me. I'm sorry. I've highlighted so many pages here. I've got to keep them straight. So for 2022, yeah. So the next gen assessment. So 2022, we saw a 84.9, right, and 75.2. Obviously, this is on the back end of COVID, right? So we see a dip there, and then we see a rebound nicely. But then, again, for the fifth grade, these are the lowest numbers we've seen since post-COVID. And again, another substantial dip. Do we have any explanation for that?
We do. That's the fifth grade cohort that Sarah and Jen were both talking about. That is the group that we're really spending a lot of time working on those reading and math skills as well to make sure that we put those resources in. So we could imagine, and certainly Melinda, you can speak to this as well, that if there's a child who's having difficulty in the area of reading specifically, it will impact how they do on the next generation science assessment because there's so much reading involved. There's also math involved where they really have to interpret and understand graphs. As Sarah was mentioning, it's a complex test where they have to really understand, once again, they might be asked to do 3 different data points and they only do 2 of those data points and they don't get the full credit for it. So we are working really hard right now with the current 6th grade. We've got a lot of resources in there to help those students to grow. So that little dip in the science results, I don't think were too surprising to us based on the kids that we were working with in the areas of reading and math as well. And once again, I think it's that ongoing communication with the science teachers and special education teachers and even reading and math specialists so that we have good comprehensive picture of the students.
And is this cohort, were these same sort of, I don't call it underperforming, I don't want to be too harsh, but compared to recent history, was that consistent in other tests in prior years as well? I mean, have we seen this?
Yeah, so this is, we've been watching this
kindergarten
cohort.
COVID class.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting even when you looked at their Smarter Balance data. So as 3rd graders, they were on the lower end of the Smarter Balance. 4th graders, they took a spike. They really worked hard and they made lots of growth, and then they took a dip as 5th graders. So once again, it could be that transition into a middle school, that you lose a little bit of ground when you make that transition. You don't know the kids from year to year, where we had those 3rd grade teachers really communicating with the 4th grade teachers. You had the reading and math specialists consistent for those teachers. You had special education teachers that were consistent for them, and then you transition them over to SAC. So you're bound to hit a little bit of bump in that transition. So our hope is that we can close that bump and really work hard with them as a 6th grade cohort. And I think as I'm watching all the nods, I think they're saying those resources are there for that 6th grade cohort now, especially because we know the standards shift for 6th grade.
And so as far as the standard shift, like that would explain sort of a dip in the 5th grade, sort of change in resources and sort of just lost in transition. But looking at ELA, and again, part of this is explained by the change of standards, but every year we do see a trough in performance in the 6th grade, right, as you look at sort of the vintages. But that's also the same, and you mentioned sort of with reading and, competition, whether it's social media and other things, right, you're less engaged in reading, it's harder to identify comprehension, just given the increased complexity of reading at that age and that material. But we also see it in math, right? For the most part, it's pretty consistently in math. I think there's one year where 7th grade is actually the trough. And so is there any other explanation beyond, like,
I really would.
every year that this is happening?
I think that you could probably look at patterns across the state as well, and you would see that drop in 6th grade. It just happens to be that transitional year that takes place. I also think it's hard to compare cohort to cohort. Like, I look at that current 5th grade class, and you looked at how they performed as 4th graders, 93.6% in reading, 93.6% in math. I'd like to hope that that's a cohort that just stays incredibly strong throughout New Canaan, even as they move into those SATs. So I do think that you're always dealing with cohorts. It's hard to compare the cohort to cohort, which is why you try to go to the scaled, vertical scaled score to really help us to determine that growth. And that's why even when I talk, I try to do the diagonal draw from where they were the year before to where they are now.
And so, and with that, and maybe embedded in this data and what's skewing it, when we look at sort of the gender comparisons, right? Like, there's much more parity at the younger ages, right? And then we see a lot more disparity as we get to the 8th grade and progressively. So, you know, do we have the vintage data by gender, and what does that reveal to us, and how are we addressing that?
So I think right now we're pleased with the growth that we've made in some of the gender data that we saw last year as some of the discrepancies. But we continue to closely monitor that. Sometimes you could have a shift in students that are even classified as high needs. So you have students who may have more boys that have IEPs. In 5th grade last year, we knew that we had more girls that had RTI plans. So when we saw that difference between the girls and the boys, the data wasn't surprising to us because we knew that we had a high percentage of girls that were in RTI. So now it's really having those conversations about, okay, so what do we do with them moving forward as 6th grade? I would have to say that usually the data doesn't surprise us. Like, we know where kids are going to perform based on what we've seen over the year. I think where it does surprise us is when we just don't see the growth that we would want to see, that we have seen across the course of the year. And so when I talk about like that student D who was still at the level 3, they met and exceeded, they met the achievement level, but they didn't make the growth. So those are the kids that we're always kind of trying to dive into too, so we don't forget them as well, because throughout the course of the year, we saw their NWEA data, we saw their district benchmarks, we saw their unit assessments. Those kids were making growth. So then you go back and you say, is it just because they just didn't have the best of days? There is a differential. There is things that happen. It's over 2 days that they're taking this test. So we're always taking that into consideration as well.
So one thing you mentioned, you said, we're analyzing the sort of the impact on boys, right? And I think, obviously I continue to talk about this, and I will continue to talk about it, but I've heard this for a couple of years now, right? That we're analyzing, right? And sort of what are we doing is I think is probably the question,
right?
Well, I think
the data this year speaks to the growth that the boys have made. I mean, when I go back and I look at in time of where some of the grade levels last year, when we were talking about those 6th grade boys last year, we were very concerned about where they were in the high 70s, and now they're in the 80s as meeting and achieving that goal. And then the same held true for the other grade levels. So I do think
what
that
I mean is that we're going from 90% to 80% or 88 to 83, right? 90 to 80 for the 8th grade is, we're talking about, a pretty homogeneous demographic here in New Canaan, and sort of the thing that we're seeing, the disparity between boys and girls, it seems pretty clear, and we've seen this as the grades get older. So back to what I was referencing with, when we look at sort of by vintage, it would be interesting to see how much gender is skewing that, right? There is, when I look at this ELA comparison, it was 10 percentage points seems like a lot.
Right, I guess, and I think we're trying to celebrate that last year, only 77% of our 6th graders, boys, were at or above goal, and we've moved them up to 83%. That, I agree, would we like them to be 88%? Of course. We made incremental growth. We got to continue to make growth as they move into 8th grade. It's not like we say, okay, they're good. We continue to keep targeting it. We continue to keep working with them to make sure that they make the necessary growth that they do. What I don't have here, which I'm happy to get to you, is I could get you a historical trend of gender over time. So I don't have that for you, but I'm trying to share the data with you verbally, but that might also not give you a good snapshot. So I can make a historical graph for you if you'd like to see that over time too.
No, that's fine, and I appreciate the improvement. I guess it's sort of really, and we see this, and I've talked about this, and we see it nationally, we see it, it's out there, right? This isn't me making it up, right? So, what are we doing? Are we at the forefront of thinking about this and addressing this problem as a school district, right? Mm-hmm. I think we've heard this from a lot of parents, and especially as it relates to middle school, and the data definitely confirms that it's more of a problem at middle school. I think even at high school, it corrects more. I'd like to see the GPA data at high school. We see test scores, we don't see GPA data, which is obviously more impactful at high school. But it's just something that I think we're constantly analyzing, but I've never heard any concrete proposals. There's things I mentioned, I got a chuckle last year about adding recess, right? Adding additional recess, or things that help, that have been proven in other schools, especially private schools that we've seen, and basically our competitors, right? There are people that are taking their kids out of Saks Middle School to go to private schools, especially their boys, because of this very reason. So I think it's something we definitely need to address for our residents.
Yeah, I think anytime we're looking at data, the thing that I love the most about it is that we come out with more questions. And certainly that 8th grade number, the females to male ratio, was something that made us ask more questions than have answers. And it has not been the consistent gap that 8th grade was every year. So it feels like sometimes we narrow the gap and then another grade expands. So one of the things that we're looking closely at are our resources. Generally speaking, boys tend to like action. They like faster stories, for example, in language arts. And a lot of the stories that we're reading that are perhaps more classic based in 8th grade are a little bit longer. Sometimes they're a little bit more flowery in their language, and that doesn't tend to engage the boys in the same way. So we're looking at making sure that our characters are varied and diverse so that our students are all experiencing different types of stories throughout the year, and we're not just falling back on the same types. And that's a response to the data. And hopefully, when we do that, we don't let go of something that has worked in another area, because anytime you make a shift, you have the capacity of losing something else. But that it just happens to be that it doesn't happen to be, it is a national trend. The NAEP data, all of the 5th through 8th grade data across the country, the females are outperforming the males. So it's definitely a question we're continuing to look at, and we bring it back to, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that engagement work with our coaches, with our data teams, going through classrooms and looking to see not just the behavioral engagement, but the cognitive engagement. How engaged are the boys at the different classrooms, at the different levels? Are we providing opportunities for that hands-on learning, for a lot of turn-in talks, for a lot of dialogue and discourse? Because that's where you can hear the kids thinking versus a lot of the reading happens inside a child's head, and it's hard to know what they're understanding. So the more that we continue to work with the design thinking process and providing opportunities for kids to show their thinking in lots of different ways, and really hitting that engagement work, we're hoping that will continue to narrow that gap. It's not a silver bullet by any means, but we're asking the questions and making sure that we're putting practices in place to make sure that we're engaging our boys.
Have we studied best practices elsewhere, or maybe take a deeper look into, there are plenty of elite private schools that are sort of all boys schools, right? Mm-hmm. That have seemingly cracked this code, or at least have more experience in addressing some of these challenges with these prepubescent boys. And so are we looking into that and trying to gain knowledge or understand best practices there? I mean, it seems like there are schools that do it, unfortunately they're private schools, but to your point, these are national trends. I think most people expect New Canaan to buck sort of these national trends, right? And to put forth the best practices out there, whether they be found in private schools or in public schools.
Right. And I think it's always hard for us to give a comparison to the private schools because they don't have to take the Smarter Balanced or the Next Generation science exam, nor do they have to follow the Common Core standards. So they really can do their flexibility with their curriculum. So really it's hard to compare us to their performance until probably they get into high school where you're looking at SATs and things of that nature. I do want to just add, and maybe Jen, you want to talk a little bit about the building thinking classrooms and what that looks like in a classroom of getting kids up and out of their seats and moving and working, because I do think that has a huge impact on boys and in that movement that's also taking place within the classroom.
Sure. We saw that 6th grade cohort that we spoke about last year, when we saw the growth that was happening in 7th grade this past year. Dr. Krente and I were looking at what was happening in that grade, what was happening there. And it was interesting. I brought it down to strong teaching. I brought it down to really understanding the student and their needs. As Sarah said earlier, there is a distinction. We do see trends with special needs and RTI students, and there is a gender difference there. It wasn't the case in 7th grade last year, but what was happening a lot, and what's happening in a lot of classrooms, is movement in the classroom with, if you walked into Saks, you'll see every room has about 8 whiteboards on their walls, and they're just for problem solving. It's for getting up and moving, and it could be to solve a simple computation problem and be able to scan the room and see what everyone else is doing and share strategies. It might be used for a gallery walk to walk around and see different strategies to problems. The lower grades were using it as well, a lot of tabletop and easels, but there is a lot of movement in that sense. So when we talk about the engagement piece and the problem solving and critical thinking, all these initiatives are all like coming together, and the work we're doing with some of the thinking tasks on these vertical surfaces. So when I think about the cohort that we were worried about, that were 7th graders this past year, they spent a lot of time, those 7th grade teachers really embraced that idea of tasks on the whiteboard, a lot of movement, even how their room is set up is kind of interesting. I'm thinking about one 7th grade teacher who has her table kind of in the center of the room, and the kids are around it. So when it comes time for a mini lesson, they're going to gather over her, and then they're going to move back. So just those constant breaks and movement has been kind of interesting, and teachers are seeing the benefit of that to get the kids up and around. So that's been a positive shift in some of our work and some of the instruction.
Thank you.
Matt asked a few of my questions, but do we know the breakout of grade 5 female versus male, like numbers?
Oh, number of students, I do not have that handy, but we might be able to get that to you and get back to you in 1 second, because I think, do you have it up handy? Perfect. You mean total number of girls in the class versus total number of boys? This would be the 5th grade from last year.
Mine's even longer than Jill's. 5th grade last year, there were 331 total students assessed last year. 159 of them were female, and 172 of them were male.
72. Okay. Do you know what it was for grade 8?
334 students, 153 of them were female, 181 of them were male.
Okay.
Overall at Saks, we have 1,245 students who were assessed, 616 females, 629 males.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. This is why we bring them along.
Going back to how engaged the boys are, I can't help myself but to give a plug for more recess, more fresh air. I like that they have to get up and move around the classroom, but the fresh air and the real unstructured play for the boys, I think, could make a huge difference in their engagement. And I'd love to take a look at indoor recess as well and see what the kids are doing for indoor recess, because those days can be really hard and long. And I'd love to just figure out a holistic way to keep these kids, especially the boys, if they're having an issue, engaged. Yeah.
I agree. We only have 6.5 hours a day with our students. It's not
know.
very much.
Even like 10 extra minutes.
Even in the DERG, we're one of the
Anything.
shortest school days, but you didn't hear me say.
Do you know the schools in the DERG, the amount of recess that they get each day?
We're all about the same. So we do have those conversations in the DERG because we're constantly looking at schedules across the DERG, especially as there was big conversations about reading programs, and certainly having conversations across the DERG. So people were sharing those schedules. So we're all about the same, especially as they put in that 30-minute lunch and we try to give them the 30-minute recess as well.
And do we know how often our outdoor learning centers are being used?
I don't have that data, but I feel like every time I walk into a school, they're being used. I see Dave nodding and Matt and Zoe, so.
it may be helpful, and we'll be glad to put this together for the board, for us to look across the grades and to look at different ways that we've incorporated movement and fresh air and otherwise into the day, right? We have our recess periods, certainly, but I know there are teachers that they're gauging their class throughout the day or the period, and if they need a break, they're doing it. They're giving them 10 minutes. They may be going outside doing other things. And there are other strategies that teachers are learning about and using regularly, both to help engage the boys throughout middle school, but also for all the kids as they're going through all the grades. So we'll get together and we'll put some information together for the board that I think would be helpful, but just really not just in the last few years, but we've really concentrated on it over the last couple of years.
Right.
We've been very intentional about building in these movement breaks, building in fresh air and sunshine and some free time. And so we'll put that together for the board.
That would be great. Could we also start to track how often classes are going to the Outdoor Learning Center? Because, I think
we have those data because
Oh,
they
we
do
do?
sign up. Yep, so we'll put that as part of what we gather
That'd be
for the
great.
board. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jill.
So I have a question that I don't need an answer to tonight, but so it might be irrelevant for me. But in any event, this is what I want to know. Is you
Am I
guys have
supposed to call you in Vietnam?
exactly. So, but we are now, and we've said as a board that we are looking at our elementary schools, and and we're looking at a North School, and what we as a board need to know, and we want to know from you is what does every elementary classroom need to look at? So we have a chance, it gets me so excited, as a district to sort of re-envision our elementary schools. And that includes, the playground spaces and making certain that when the kids go outside, they get to maximize their use of the playground. So sometimes, like you hear people say, we'll just throw more kids into each school, and we don't need a North School. Part of me is saying, recess is going to be a problem. So, what I think the board might want to hear, I'd certainly like to read about, would be what do you need in a classroom now to deliver this amazing education? Now that we have the Literacy Academy and we need a space for that. We have our classroom coaches. We need them to be able to work appropriately. We have all the specialists. We designed these classrooms in the 90s. Or we built them in the 90s, so they were designed even earlier. So we have to just show this community what we need, what we want, how our kids, boys and girls, will soar. And I think we can make the case for doing it. So that's my challenge to you.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to answer that tonight.
You sure you don't want to stay, Penny? So I hesitate to ask this question, but the math scores are just off the charts. And I know we have, opportunities for extension with 7th and 8th graders taking high school math. But is there more that we should be doing there, or do we feel like we already have a lot of opportunities for those students?
So the extensions begin in 5th, and then they can move into, it's multiple choices. It's advanced math in 6th grade, and then they can compact in for 7th and 8th grade. So Sarah, Jen, do you have that memorized, the math progressions? But there's opportunities.
Yeah, you don't have to go through the details. It was just a conceptual question. Yeah.
I think in terms of courses, a few years ago, right after COVID, we went to just 5th grade being the first opportunity to advance into an advanced course. So there's 2 levels in 5th, there's 2 levels in 6th, and then we start looking at how to prepare students for double advanced moving on. Leading up to that, I think, is where we do a lot of work with some reasoning and problem solving to get kids ready for that analytical thinking. A lot of times they have to compact curriculum, so we have recognized that there are very critical times when we don't want to do that too soon, and we don't want to rush students because we're pretty respectful of what happens and where it goes in the high school. So in terms of course offerings, I feel like we're in a good place with our offerings, and our differentiation happens at all the courses at all the levels, and that's something we are looking at. So if we have a really strong 2nd grader, we're looking for ways to stretch that student and we differentiate up for that student. And that's really what we do at all of the levels. And I think our communication with the high school has been helpful to see, are we preparing students in the right ways, so that we're not creating holes, because that's always our biggest worry of advancing to a new course too soon.
And I do think that's where the math coach has been very helpful too, in trying to work with teachers on how to extend those standards for them as well.
So it's been touched on a couple of times already, but this current 6th grade class, that's 5th grade in the results, I think Sarah mentioned how it's a bit of a larger class. It sounds like a class that has some differentiation in terms of needs. So my question is, because we're about to embark on budget season, does this class need a little bit more, or is there something we need to provide as they move into the 7th and 8th grade years? Just because some of those factors are structural, but we still want to get that cohort up to the level, and I think we've identified it as just having some challenges, but we still need to get them to where they need to be by the end of 8th and going into high school.
We're always examining that. We'll take a look at it as we begin our budget discussions, actually this week. So we'll be diving more deeply into it. I think one of the positives is sometimes you have that large class and it's followed by the smaller class. And so sometimes you can take those resources that were being used for the smaller class and apply them to that larger class. And so that is kind of the pattern that we've been following at SACS: large class, small class, large class, small class. And that's how we kind of reallocate some of those resources. But certainly I'll be talking with the administrators and the coordinators over the next month as we get ready for budget season. So
Great. And then my other question, building off what Matt was talking about before with the gender breakdown and ELA, I wanted to go back to our previous presentation with Bill Egan about the high school and the fact that 2 out of the last 3 years, we actually had our males performing on the SAT above our females, which led me to the question of, is there a timing factor in there of just what students are ready for, and is it possible it's different? And because I guess, this is a snapshot of what's happening in middle school, which is incredibly important to see, but it's also important to say, like, where we get to at the end of high school, and, are students getting there at a different time, and is there possibly a gender component to getting there at a different time?
I would agree with that. I also would say that we have to have sometimes conversations with our 7th and 8th graders, because it's not something that's reported into Power School. So they will often not understand the importance of it. And so we've had goal-setting conferences with some of our 7th and 8th graders, by our reading specialists, by our coordinators, where we're sitting down and saying, like, this is important. You understand that, like, these do count. They are going to move you forward. And I do think that we see a big jump developmentally with 8th grade boys to 9th grade boys. And that's something that we've seen over time, just in how they take their academics, how much more they're reading, how much more they're studying. So we do see that developmental jump from 8th to 9th grade as well.
And I would also build on that to Brendan's point around the options for math, that my understanding is we've done a lot to create multiple entries so that if you're not on that path in 5th grade and 6th grade, that there are still ways to get on that path, even as you're entering high school. If you realize midstream that your goal is to get to, like, let's say the math, calculus, AB test, that you can get there even if you were not in the compacted class or the advanced classes in early or mid-middle school.
That's correct. So there's multiple paths, even for how kids get into AP classes, multiple different pathways for all of the content areas as they move into high school. So certainly that's a big role of the guidance counselors, is really sitting with them and having conversations about what is their pathway, how are they going to meet the graduation requirements as part of some of the conversations that started in 9th grade. It's not about necessarily where you're going to college, but it's more about these are graduation requirements, and you have to meet all of these graduation requirements by your senior year. It's a new concept to ninth graders. So then it's kind of like, well, where are your interests? Where might you find yourself really gravitating towards wanting to take an honors or AP kind of class throughout your pathway here at New Canaan High? What's something that you would like to learn about that you haven't learned about in the past? Or if you're really interested in the area of science or math, then we'll figure out ways to double you up. So there's multiple pathways for all of the kids.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to get Melinda involved here because,
It's only fair.
right, equal
Why not,
opportunity,
Melinda?
right? So on the interdisciplinary, that's a mouthful, interdisciplinary work and cross-disciplinary work we've been doing in science, how long have we been doing that? Why did we go down that path, and what have those results looked like so far?
I don't have the exact year or the start of the grade 2. The grade 2 was the interdisciplinary unit between social studies, science, and reading. And so we probably about 3
I think
years
it's
ago?
3 years.
3 years ago, we started that. And what we realized was that some of the units that we taught in reading and writing with informational texts either started right before the science unit or was a large part of the science unit that we were including. And so we thought that it would make sense to kind of combine those together. And what better way to learn about plant and animal relationships than using the field guides that were prepared for the science lessons as an informational text for the students to kind of go through. And it also was driven by some of the classroom teachers because they see all 3 of the disciplines. They see the UBDs, the curriculum that we're doing, and they see the overlaps. And they realize that if we're able to overlap and share the experience together with our students, then they're going to be deeper into that learning. So I would say about 3 years.
It's been about 3, yeah.
And it's great too, as you saw the Venn diagram, when you have the overlapping practices, then you're able to reinforce that language with the students. So if we're comparing, contrasting, if we're finding patterns, if we are looking for cause and effect in any of the disciplines, then it makes sense for kids when we say find cause and effect with the plant and animals, that they're able to identify those. The piece that we had earlier about the shared language, that was a focus area that we started this year within grade 7. We have social studies teachers and science teachers who said we have very common language, again, by examining the UBDs and the curriculum. So when we're studying about climate, and we're looking at resources in social studies, what are some of the languages we're using? And we just met, and it was great because we analyzed our words, we made Venn diagrams of our word walls, and then we decided on some common languages. So when you go into a social studies class and you go into a science class, you'll see the word walls with the same words on it between the 2 classes. So we're going to examine how students are using that language across both of our disciplines a little bit more closely as the year continues.
So going back to something that Erica touched upon a little bit, obviously scoring well, having a cohort or an individual that scores well in 3rd grade is very important. But really we're talking about how are they performing in high school and then later on. And so on an individual or a cohort basis, to what degree are scores in the early or even middle school indicative of how they're going to perform on SATs, the number of APs taken, the scores on the APs, all those perhaps bigger factors? I mean, if you get a 75 as a cohort in 3rd grade, I mean, is it going to be a forever middling class, or are we going to, do they catch up, and how much is it a predictor?
So I'm going to put my elementary principal hat on for this answer because this is truly developmental.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what's so wonderful about this district is all the different entries and pathways. And so it's, not unusual to be sitting with someone that might have a 3rd grader and just talking about who they are as a 3rd grader and that they may not be taking their academics as seriously as they should be as a 3rd grader, but they're growing in other areas, and it's amazing. You run into that parent in the supermarket as a sixth grader and like, oh my gosh, it's starting to click. It's the same thing. I wish I had the magic answer to say every child is going to read by such and such a date. We have kids that enter kindergarten who are readers, and their parents say, I don't know how they learned to read. They just picked up the book and were starting to read someday. And then you have others who are struggling in second grade to learn to read. And then all of a sudden, the teacher's like, I don't know, the light bulb just went off and boom, now they can't put books down and it's February of second grade. So I really do think it's just about how students are made and develop mentally and how they grow. And I would never want to say that this is a pathway for a child because pathways change. And I've seen kids who have not been recommended for honors classes in ninth grade, put in an appeal, challenge it, and are knocking it out of the park in honors. Like really, you look and you go, oh my gosh, they weren't recommended for honors bio, but they put in that appeal and now they're sitting in honors bio and they're getting an A. So I just think that kids change over time, and I would never want to say this is their pathway.
No, and that's not what I was implying. What I was actually asking was, in terms of the data that we have as far as high school performance and getting into college and SATs, APs, all the rest of it, how much is the early ages a predictor of that success? Yes, on an individual child can what have you, but is a cohort, what I'm trying to get to is a cohort that scores, let's say, in the 70s or the low 80s in third and fourth grade. Are there resources, as we're sort of talking about, is it a question of resource deployment and allocation that can then get them to rise, right, to the higher levels? Or, because as I'm looking at my lines, right, trying to match the cohorts, it looks like, and I'm eyeballing this, there's a below 85 in the younger years sort of ends up around that same score, and above 85 ends up somewhere above 85, as they go along. Yes, there's spikes and ups and downs, but to what degree is it a predictor of future success? And can we allocate budget or resources or what have you, weighting towards those that are scoring lower in the early years so that we can catch them up, versus classes that are scoring higher who may just be naturally better at taking tests or whatever this is telling us? I don't know.
I think the only thing that I could answer that I think is most helpful is when you look at those individuals. It is really diving into the individual students in any cohort of students. So once again, I think it's always saying, what can we do for the individuals to help them to grow, to become better readers, to become better writers, to become better mathematicians and scientists. I think it's how do you prepare them. And there is, yes, there is some test-taking strategies that all children need to learn whenever they're taking tests as well. But I do think that it just comes back to those individual scores. I have never tracked the data from, starting in third grade all the way up to see where they perform as juniors with the SATs. Nor have I tracked where they've gone to college. But I can say that I think that everybody's going to grow based on the programs that we can provide for them. And when they're not growing, that's when we're having other conversations with parents and with students and with teachers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just add, the key is the intervention that happens each year with the scores, right? So Jill mentioned RTI before. Because with the data teams and the research that we do annually as we get the scores, and actually all throughout the year, we're always looking at new interventions and new efforts and things to help move kids along. If we looked at the scores and just allowed it to continue, then you'd have a sort of a closed loop scientific type study. But because we're always intervening in working to help catch up those kids and move them along, the question really, I think, is a good one around resources, right? Do we have the right resources in place to provide the most effective interventions for those kids who need them in order to help them continue to improve? And that's our goal. That's what we look at, and that's the conversation we're going to be starting even on Thursday when we talk about where are we, where can we be, do we have those supports, and are we resourced in the right way to get the interventions to the kids at the right times to help them continue to grow.
that's sort of where I was headed with my line of questioning is, if an individual child or a cohort is on this trajectory, to what, and we can predict if you start here, right, you're going to end here, versus if you start here, you might end up here, right? How do we assist that cohort that might be scoring lower now to get and reach a higher mean?
Right, and so, those are the interventions, right? What interventions do we put in place? How do we intervene in order to help improve those results, right?
Yes.
We do it child by child. That's where the growth metric is so powerful, right? Because it may look like at a high level that children are progressing, but are they? Are they continuing to grow, or are they just continuing to meet the benchmark number at the lower end? That's why we go into really great depth child by child in doing that, and that's where bulk of our resources go. And it actually loops all the way back to Hugo's first question about our identification rate in special education. I believe, and there's data to back this up, that our response to intervention program is so strong that many students who might otherwise have been identified around special education they don't have those needs, because we're able to identify, intervene, remediate, and get them right back on track. And so those any gap areas don't compound over time to lead to a potential learning disability, because we're able to get in there, intervene, and make those changes. But it's something that we look at all throughout the year. We dive into it annually for sure, and make sure that we have those resources there. So when we hit budget, we'll be talking about it again. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just one thing, in answer to Julie's question, you mentioned sort of the breakdown of gender from grade 5 and 8, and also gave the overall breakdown of gender for SACS as a whole. And it seemed to me that SACS as a whole, it seems like it's pretty close to 50-50, whereas there's a disproportionate amount of men relative to the other grades, right? For 5th and 8th grade, a disproportionate amount of boys relative to what the average is for SACS. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So then if we look at that and we compare that to the ELA data as we look at it by grade, it kind of highlights what I was saying, in that the lowest points for SACS Middle School are exactly the 5th and 8th grade. They're skewed much lower, I would assume, because they're skewed towards boys. Is that correct? I'm just kind of going off of the numbers you gave and back of the envelope.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought this back up, because after I sat down, I remembered something I wish I had said, which is, the work that we're doing with design thinking. And, we talked a little bit about the recess and about the movement, and that's a big component of it. But I think that in the classroom, it's also important that we're making sure that the curriculum and the work that we're doing is relevant and meaningful for the kids. The kids will tell you, the boys will tell you especially, that they love the projects that we do. They love working with each other. They love having choice and voice in what they're doing. And I think we have to build a lot more of that in, so that kids are having that experience, not just in recess times, but also in the classroom, in the curriculum, in a problem-solving approach. And that's a lot of what we've been doing. You talked about studying best practice of private schools, and Nueva is a private school that we've gone to visit and study, which is all around that design thinking and innovation work. So a lot of what we're doing, connected to the engagement, connected to the curriculum revision, is really all with the intent to get kids really to those competencies of the portrait of the graduate, and making sure that they're problem solving, they're curious, but that our curriculum and our experiences that we're providing for them are lining up to that. And that's what I think a perfect school would be, where our kids come in and are excited and curious and engaged, behaviorally, cognitively connected to their school. But yes, to answer your question, there is the gap in those two areas where there are larger amounts of boys. The gap is a little bit wider in those two areas.
Great, thank you. And just, again, to reiterate that, and I guess Erica's point, which, as I mentioned, in high school, we see that close the gap, but that's as measured by the SAT. And the SAT, if you think about the variables, SATs are usually, for New Canaan, most kids prep for that. And so you have targeted preparation and tutoring that meets directly the needs for those boys. So it's not a question of their aptitude or their capability, but the instruction that they're receiving. And so with SATs, receiving specific instruction tailored to them, they're doing it just as well, in some cases outperforming. What we need to address is where we're giving blanket generic instruction across genders, where are they falling behind?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of components to that, a lot of factors to that. I think that the high school pathway is a little bit different than middle school as well. I think that there's a motivation component to that. There's absolutely a developmental component to that. Kids are going through adolescence at a tough time and still trying to figure themselves out in middle school. I have I have a sophomore daughter and 2 boys, and their experience has been very different than her experience. Same parents, but different experience based on how they're built, and how I work with them and how they are engaged is also very different. I think my middle boy is probably, has the highest aptitude, if I'm being honest, but does he show
Careful, this is
himself in
recorded.
that way? Yeah. Does he show himself in that way all the time? Not necessarily. So I think that there are a lot of factors that go into it, and that's what we're constantly trying to do to make sure that they feel connected and engaged.
Perfect, thank you.
Sorry, one last quick one for Jill. Jill, you mentioned the the idea that kids can have bad days, and that shows up in these numbers, and there's nothing you can kind of do about that. When we think about that as a district, and without putting too much emphasis on these tests, do we do anything other than, I'm remembering the emails that I get about, like, hey, these are the dates for the tests, like, and my wife and I are just like, God, let's get the kids to bed. It's very sort of reactive in that way. Do we do anything else at a district? Like, do we remind the kids? Do we, I'm just curious if there's anything other than that email that goes out where the parents go, oh, here we go.
So yes, we communicate with all of the parents, and certainly we communicate with the students. One of the most important things is that the students show up with their computer charged. So we have 6th and 7th and 8th graders that need to make sure that the device is charged when they arrived at school just to take it. So the kids are well aware. We talk about getting a good night's sleep. We talk about having a good breakfast in the morning. So we talk about all those healthy habits. They do that throughout the course of the year even as they're taking their exams. Even the first time they might be approaching midterm exams in mathematics in 6th grade. So how do we study for them? What do we do the night before? What do we do the week before? And it's all about those good, healthy habits that we want to instill when they're young.
Great, thank you.
Going once, twice, we're good? All right, thank you so much, everyone. Really helpful. Yeah. Just for the record.
For the record, yeah, can we get that recorded?
This is being,
Turn the mic on.
this is being recorded. That's great. Yeah, thank you so much. You can all obviously head home. Drive safely. Thank you. All right, moving on. Sean, you're up with statements of accounts, please.
Good evening, everybody. So this is our first financial report for the year, the month of September. Our operating fund actual through September is $20.1 million, which represents 17.7% of our full-year budget of $113.8. We've also encumbered an additional $82 million, or 72% of the budget, and mostly for salaries, benefits, property and purchase services. And right now that results in us having about $11 million of unencumbered budget, or 9.9%. I mentioned that our year-to-date attainment is 17.7. When you compare that to last year at this time, we were 18%, so indicates that we're spending at a slightly slower rate than we were last year. It's really too early to make any calls on that, but two of the drivers of that on a year-to-year basis are in purchase services for mainly in outplaced tuition, and then instructional supplies. In grants, awarded grants to date, plus carryover from prior year, is $1.947 million. Year-to-date expenditures of $212,000, leaving a remaining balance of $1.735. Over in school lunch, our year-to-date revenue is $421,000, which is 13% of our full-year budget of $3.2 million. And it's a year-to-year increase of $43K, or 11.3%. Just for information, our budget was based on a 3% year-to-year increase. So Through September, we're growing 11.3%, which is pretty remarkable. Sales are up 39,000 out of that 43, and is up 11%. Also, catering, 11% for sales. Catering is up 6,000 year to year, up 47%. Total expense through September is 174,000, or 5.7% of our full year budget. And it's a year-to-year decrease of 130,000, or minus 43%. The reason for the decrease year-to-year is that we've got invoices for groceries, dairy, and paper products that were not processed until the accounting month of October. So we'll see catch-up in the month of October. As a result of that delay, the timing difference in the expenses, our net income, let's see, where are we? I lost my place here. Net income, as a result, is artificially high at $247,000. So we estimate that there's about $120,000 of catch-up required in the month of October. So that 247 is probably overstated by about that amount, 120. And right now our fund balance is 906. If we normalize for the 120, we'd be more at about $700,000. One final point on food services. If you look, we budgeted $210,000 for equipment sales, which was intended to cover the 3 elementary school walk-in freezer refrigerators. We were able to do that in June by using fund balance. So the 210 that we budgeted for this year will likely not be used, or most of it will likely not be used, which will serve to just restore that fund balance that we used in the month of June. In facility rentals, donations, and summer school, facility rentals revenue 17,000, expenses 43, net income minus 25, leaving a fund balance of 302,000. Donations revenue 15K year to date, expenses 38,000, and a net income of minus 23, leaving a fund balance of 156. And finally, summer school revenue 123,000, expenses 133, at a net income of minus 10, leaving a fund balance of 161,000. Any questions?
So I remember last year when our sales in the school lunch program went down, you said it was because more students were buying the hot lunches.
That's right.
So they're up this year. Are they back to buying chips and cookies? I mean, is there a difference in the mix?
We haven't looked into that, but it's a good question. And I'm really happy to see it growing year to year. I really am, because I was getting tired of saying we're down year to year. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Typically what happens, and the other item was not only just full meals versus chips and snack, it was also the free and reduced growing.
Right.
And typically what happens every year is we start out at a certain level and then it grows towards the end of the year. So that had grown to about 160 plus in January. So it was significant growth from the prior year. So we did have quite a bit of growth. I anticipate we'll probably have, it'll continue to grow from this part of the year to the end of the year as well. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. Thanks.
And Penny, I'm going to miss you. So thanks for everything.
Great, thank you very much. And now we've got an action item, a donation, another one from the All Sports Booster Club.
Yes, we received a proposal for donation from the All Sports Booster Club in the amount of $65,062.24. As usual, the All Sports Booster Club is helping to fund the coaches in order to reduce the coach-to-student ratio across the board. They're always very careful to balance it across our sports and our genders across the sports, with very aware of Title IX. This $65,000 will fund 9 coaches at a stipend level 4, 2 coaches at a stipend level 5, and 1 coach at a stipend level 6. So there are 12 coaches for the fall sports that the All Sports Booster Club is in their words, delighted to provide a donation for. And we are delighted to bring it forward to the board for your approval tonight so that we can continue providing the outstanding experience for each and every one of our student athletes in high school.
That's great, thank you. Can I get a motion, please, to approve a donation of $65,062.24 from the New Canaan All Sports Booster Club to fund additional fall coaching positions? Julie, second. Penny, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you so much, and we are delighted as well.
Wonderful.
Any comments from the public? All right, moving on to announcements of future business, please.
Yes, so today I had the pleasure of joining a representative from Audio Enhancement to tour the high school and to look at the new system that's been in place, been installed. We're still doing some commissioning and working through some of the kinks, but by all reports, the teachers, the kids, and our own experience in those rooms, the system is working quite well. We have, just today was the first day that they customized the bells, so the bells were only ringing in classrooms that it impacted. So for instance, for students that go to first lunch, after that first lunch, they go to their class, and then typically they would hear 4 different bells in that class until it was time to leave. Now they'll only hear the one at the end of the period when it's time to go. So instead of hearing them all throughout every 20 some odd minutes, it'll help with that. So this is the first day we did it. There's still a few more kinks to work out, but we are really on a great path. We also had a demo of the language translation dimension of that. So we sat in a room and had it real-time translated into a couple of different languages, and there was only, maybe it was a 1-second delay, give or take, and really powerful technology to see in action. So we are excited to get this up and running across the board, but we took a big step forward today by having Copeland, is the name of the representative from the company, come down from New Hampshire and spend a couple of hours walking through the building together. So that was great. Our next meeting will be November 3rd. And at that meeting, it's another one of our highly anticipated meetings every year. Ms. Pianca will be sharing with us our enrollment projections and staff utilization report. It's good stuff. Looking forward to that. And there you go.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to be adjourning to executive session. The move to adjourn to executive session in accordance with CGS 1200, subject to be discussed is collective bargaining and tentative agreements with the New Canaan Administrators Association, NCAA, and the United Public Service Employees Union, UPS-EU, teacher assistants. Can I get a motion to adjourn to executive session? Phil, second. Laura, all in favor? Unanimous. Great. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.